The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
So we're here today with Heather Hoff, who's the co-founder of Mothers for Nuclear. And just from my perspective over the last 5 years, watching you is like one of the leading nuclear advocates. It's just been so impressive. And so thank you for taking the time to come on our show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So, man, there's so much we could talk about California nuclear, and I'd love to get the whole history of it in general. But before we do, let's just learn a little bit about you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Arizona, in the boonies, kind of, as I like to call it, a little place called Top of the World. And some of my family and friends used to tease me about being from, middle of nowhere or end of the earth or wherever. We didn't have very many resources or neighbors, kind of lived on our own off the land, conserving, composting everything. I had a composting toilet, which was very embarrassing for me when I got to junior high.
Oh my God.
And even sooner when I had friends over.
Your parents were like hippies or something, or
a little bit, yeah. My mom definitely had like the brown and yellow hippie bikini and like took pictures out on the boulders on the rocks, when she was pregnant with me in her bikini.
Oh my
yeah.
God. And what did your dad do for work?
My mom was a teacher, so she was the breadwinner for our family, and my dad did all kinds of odd jobs. He was a welder, woodworker, landscaper. He did, well pumps and chainsaws and all kinds of lathe work. And basically kind of helped build our homestead up there with, a water system that pumps water from our well, which didn't produce very much, up into a tank above our trailer and kind of supplied the water pressure for our house. And
what did your mom teach?
Elementary school. Yeah.
And
It was an interesting childhood growing up. Lots of people loved to come to visit me, and I loved to show off where I lived. It was really fun. I had free reign of the hills, like exploring boulders and chasing cows and rattlesnakes. And
I was gonna ask you, were there scorpions or rattlesnakes out there?
Yeah, scorpions for sure. I remember one time there was a rattlesnake near our house, and my dad would never kill anything. He caught it somehow, and I remember this image of him like holding it while he was riding his bike down the street, holding the rattlesnake to go take it, further away and let it go. So,
wow. Okay, and then so I have to ask, like just reflecting on your childhood and your upbringing, have you like connected the dots as to how that led to what your career decisions would be?
Oh, it's totally different than what I expected or ever planned. I kind of was good at math and science and just always assumed that I'd go into engineering. I didn't really know what I was going to do with that or why I really liked it, if I actually really liked it. And I ended up in materials engineering at Cal Poly here in San Luis Obispo, where I still live. And after I graduated—
Beautiful part of the world. Beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. My mom's a twin sister and her family lives here. So I've been coming here since I was little. We kind of trade holidays. They would come up to Top of the World and, sometimes play in the snow. And we would come here and get to experience the beach, which is pretty amazing. Montana de Oro is one of my favorite places in the world. And that's a state park that's just north of Diablo Canyon. On the coast here, and here's a little picture of Diablo Canyon. It's beautiful also, and I had no idea until I really started working there. It's like an extension of the state park, so it's pretty great.
That's so cool. Can you tell me the history of that power plant specifically?
Generally, Well, I guess what I knew of it in college is there's this big industrial facility out on the coast, and as an engineer, I was kind of interested in it. I did go on a tour once and really had no idea what I was looking at, except there
How
was a
old
lot
were
of
you when you went on that
equipment.
tour?
Probably 20.
Okay. Yeah.
19 or 20, yeah. And so kind of fascinating, kind of scary, big and noisy, lots of equipment. And I didn't really, I don't know, think about what it was even for, generating electricity. I was a materials engineer, so I was more interested in the equipment and the steel and, all the components of the plant were pretty cool.
And those tours, because I'm like actually a big fan of us opening up nuclear facilities to more public tours. I think
Me
like
too, yes. Yeah, so
So
I have to mention that now, yeah, I do work for the company that runs the plant, and I walk a very fine line between my advocacy for nuclear and for Diablo Canyon and my employment at the plant. For the last 6 years, my company has been kind of marching down this path towards decommissioning, towards shutting down the plant. And all of my messaging has been the complete opposite of what they want. And they've been quietly tolerant of me and mostly. And it's been a little challenging. So I just want listeners to know that nothing that I say here today represents anything my company would say. It's all my own personal opinion and for Mothers for Nuclear. And yeah, so after I graduated in materials engineering with my degree, I couldn't find a job locally. It's a, fairly small town, not like where I grew up, but, it's not a big city either. There wasn't a whole lot of options in engineering. So I manufactured rectal thermometers for cows for about 9 months. And then that's my favorite job title. Then I worked at a winery in the tank room, which was really fun. I kind of like manual labor, like shoveling and pumping things. It was my first exposure to kind of like big pumps and valves, like pumping the juice over, and super fun. But just for a harvest season. And then I worked at a clothing store where I made $7.50 an hour. And I eventually was like, this is ridiculous. I need to get a real job. I have an engineering degree. And okay, I guess maybe I'll try Diablo Canyon, but I was pretty nervous about it. My uncle is a physics professor at the university, and he had made a lot of comments that made me really nervous about radiation. And my mom had also made comments. She told me, well, I don't know if you should be working there in your reproductive years. And I was like, wow, that's scary. Like, what does that mean? I don't even know like how to process that. And
but you did it anyway.
yeah, so I was
you have some sort of like
nervous.
defiance streak to you, or what's the
I don't know what possessed me necessarily. Just other than I'm a really curious person. I like to ask a lot of questions, and I happened into a job in operations, which all of nuclear really, but especially operations, they have a motto, like a tool about questioning attitude. They want you to ask questions. They want you to understand what you're doing before you go out in the plant and do it, so you don't make mistakes. And so they're like, yeah, ask us everything. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna ask you everything. And I think I drove my coworkers a little bit batty at the beginning, what about this and what about that? And this sounds really scary. Why are we doing it this way? And oh my gosh, what, like I had so many concerns, and so many things about nuclear just sound kind of naturally scary that I really, really dug in hard on a lot of issues, and also heard, a lot of things that were scary that I was never able to really verify. And it
like
just,
what?
yeah.
Do you have any examples of that? Like, do you remember any of the misconceptions that you had early on in your career?
Well, I'm hesitant to get into this too early, because I just thought of a crazy story that I haven't really shared with that many people yet, even, through all of my advocacy. But it's not a misconception, I don't think, but I'm not totally sure. When I was a brand new operator, like one of the things that super worried me, I read this operating experience, which is something that nuclear industry does really well at. We all share information. So when something happens at another plant, we get all the details, like here's what led up to it, here's what happened, and
This is
here's how
through
they
like
dealt with it. And
through like INPO or something, exchanges.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's all kinds of industry groups that are designed for sharing information to better our performance, so we don't make the same mistake twice, and we can be prepared
It's
for
super cool
anything.
actually that the nuclear industry does that.
It's really something that's different than a lot of other industries, and something that's definitely made us what we are today in terms of being the safest and being such a reliable operator of these complex facilities. And
Yeah, that's what I would have gone to first. Just like the high uptime is definitely got to be partially attributed to the sharing of the
yes,
learnings. Like,
yeah,
and like
it's been
the
amazing.
nuclear power plant operators are like world class. It's like the all-star team of all power plant operators,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's always like any little mistake is like a huge deal too, like you hear of something that happens at a nuclear plant and people immediately get scared, like even if it's just like a paper cut. Oh,
So
and
come back to
someone
your
got
story.
injured
Come back
at
to your story.
nuclear.
What was the thing? Sorry, I
Hmm?
interrupted your
Oh,
story.
yeah, the story. Well, so I read this description of this event that happened at another plant, and it was like employees make coffee with radiation water. And I was like, what? Oh my gosh. Like somehow they had cross-tied their domestic water system and it had like with one of their plant systems. And I was just like, I was terrified. I would not drink any water from the plant, none of the drinking fountains. I always brought all my own stuff for years and years. And I just it was the most, ridiculous thing that I'd ever heard of happening. Like, how can this happen? And
Did that actually turn out to be true, or is that just people were,
well, that's what I said. Like sometimes I'm not totally
yeah,
able to verify
or was it
all
just
the
like the sewer
details.
lines got crossed or something? It's like, yeah,
Well, yeah,
that's
that wouldn't be quite as bad, but no, you wouldn't make coffee with that. So I don't know exactly what happened. I don't remember the details now, but I just remember reading something similar to that and just being terrified for years,
yeah.
And I think that's part of the thing about nuclear is we have so many systems and such complexity. It's really hard for people to understand when something's truly a safety issue and when it's not. And over the years, even though I never really got an answer to that question, I'm just like, well, does it even matter that that happened? And like in our industry, we're like, yeah, every little thing matters. But for like real life, in terms of harming human health or the planet, like a lot of the stuff that we care about doesn't really matter. And so I try and keep all of those things in context, like they might sound scary, but compared to what, like what's the impact and what's the alternative? And I think it's really important to talk about all those other things.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. I think that ability to put something in context, like that is definitely like an elevated style of thought.
Yeah.
And most people are just like, most people don't think that much. They just react. They just say something. They just kind of repeat what they heard the last five people
Mhm.
say about any given topic. But no, I love how you incorporate like a questioning perspective into everything that you do.
It's been a
Tell
really
me
important
about
way.
the roles that you had at the plant. You said you were an operator. What does that mean
Yes.
exactly?
Yeah. So when I was first hired, I was a nuclear operator or a plant operator. Some of their sites call them equipment operators. So I was in training for a really long time before I even went in the plant, classroom training to learn about all the systems and learn, basic thermodynamics principles and about pumps and motors and valves and a lot of the theory behind the equipment in the plant. And then spent a whole bunch of time, under instruction with other qualified operators who were in the plant, learning from them how they do their jobs. And then
What do
that
they do? They're
job,
like maintaining equipment. Is that the idea? Like, how do I
um,
designate that role from like a control room operator? Like, what's the difference?
yeah. Yeah, well, the control room operators would always call us the eyes and ears of the plant. So we would go and do rounds on all the areas of the plant, look at the equipment, record parameters for trending, so we could tell if a piece of equipment was degrading over time. We could do preventative maintenance. We would identify any minor leakage or minor problems with equipment that we think, might turn into something more. We'd identify that and kind of flag it. And then the maintenance group would come in and actually work on it and fix it. So we did a very minor amount of maintenance, like just tightening things and basic housekeeping, keeping oil wiped up, keeping the plant safe for people to be in, and really monitoring the condition of everything that was happening.
And my
And
understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, my understanding is that in the nuclear industry, this recording of data is still like a very manual process. It's like you'll take a measurement as a human being, you'll like write it down on something, then you'll like enter it into a database, as opposed to like there just being like a network of sensors that's automatically capturing everything?
It's a really weird combination of both, because plants have lots of different, plant operators have gone, different levels in terms of trying to upgrade their systems and processes to support more advanced technology. So I think my company has done an amazing job with Diablo Canyon, and we have a lot of really innovative kind of new ways of doing things that other plants don't have, but maybe they have different ways. And
Are there things that are still manual, not because the technology or the will isn't there to upgrade it, but because of like regulatory requirements about like how data should be captured and
yeah, for
transferred?
sure. Yeah, definitely. Lots of our, digital control systems took a fair amount of effort, to get approved by, different requirements that we have for safety. Like there's a whole level of approvals and considerations that other companies that use maybe the same technology for monitoring might not have, that nuclear is like a level above in terms of making sure that we can, take data in appropriate fashion and make the right decision about it and decide how to operate the plant. And so it's something that I got really interested in as a control room operator too, because we had so many different systems that were getting upgraded to digital systems while I was an operator, and so I got to see the transition and the differences. And there's plant systems that control important, like our turbine control system and our main feed water control system, and those are important and they have to function right. And then there's other systems like our plant process computer that just kind of give us information but don't control anything, but they're still also very important because we use that information to make decisions. And then there's like different low-level things out in the plant where maybe just engineers use them for trending or whatever. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see all the different variety of systems and how our engineers and designers best think about how we're going to use the data from those to better operate the plant. So,
And what about the reactor control itself? Is that mostly analog still? And
oh my
what
gosh,
are
yeah, same thing. It's like a weird combination of like manual, like we have a touch screen where when we maintain our power levels, the main way that we do that at Diablo Canyon is with what we call a chemical shim. So we have
that's increasing the percentage of boron in the water? Is that the
yeah,
idea? Okay.
or decreasing it. Yeah, taking boron out, performing a dilution of the
And that's
plant.
called a reactivity insertion. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. I'm still trying to
Yeah.
get all the Okay. So
Yeah,
you
I would
take
love to
something
dig into
out to
all this
insert
with you.
reactivity. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's funny. It's not quite the discussion I was expecting to have with you, but yeah, I love talking about plant operations and how we control reactivity. And speaking of that, a lot of people ask us about Chernobyl, the miniseries, and I don't know if you've seen it, but there's that one.
I couldn't stomach it after the first episode. It was just too much like sensationalizing.
Yeah, but there's some really great stuff in there actually, and it's one of the best descriptions that I've ever seen about reactivity and like positive and negative and like how they balance. If you insert positive reactivity and then like you need to insert negative reactivity, and that's how you keep power levels stable. And like at Chernobyl, like they talked about, well, we took this away and then we added this, and that's how things got like really out of balance. And it's a really great description of that.
When I visited Calvert Cliffs, they told, and this is the first time that I heard that PWRs are run with their control rods full out during normal
Yeah.
operation. Is that totally common across industry now? And is that the same at Diablo?
Yes. Yeah, I
And
think
then,
it's
okay, so
pretty
the control
normal.
rods are out. We're using chemical shims to control reactivity on like what time scale? Daily, monthly, weekly?
It depends on the time in core life, like whether we have a brand new set of new fuel, like if we just did a refueling outage and we have, that's where we shut down a unit on purpose and we do a whole bunch of maintenance that we can't do when the plant's online. And we also add 1/3 of our fuel as brand new fuel assemblies. And the other ones are kind of like reused over multiple fuel cycles. So we have some new fuel in the reactor, and it's very reactive. We kind of load it a little bit more so that we can, as it, we also call it burning out, which is something that's a little confusing for people because we say we don't burn stuff in a nuclear plant, but technically, yeah, I don't know. We
Burn
say
your
that we burn the
poisons.
uranium.
Yeah.
So it's funny because yeah, nothing combusts. It's just fission. But
And then
yeah,
as the control room operator, how much are you involved in like the neutronic planning? Let's say, what percentage enrichment of which fuel bundles go where? Is it just they're like someone else decides and then they like tell you, or are you like,
yeah, we're not involved in planning that. We have a set of reactor engineers. They do a core design and decide, which fuel assemblies go in which locations in the core. There's 197 fuel assemblies that are, like make kind of a general circular shape in the core. And so they have to balance that with, the new fuel assemblies and the old ones. And it all depends on the operational history, if we had to ramp down or shut down for various times, and maybe we didn't use up as much of the uranium in certain fuel assemblies as we did in other ones. So it's all controlled and calculated and balanced by our reactor engineering group. And one of the things that's really cool, I have to tell you a story about our reactor engineers. They're great. And we were headed down this plan to shut down in 2025, and that didn't quite line up normally with our fuel cycle, which is normally 18 to 22 months, that we run one unit. So we're planning ahead for how do we design this fuel cycle that's a shorter fuel cycle in preparation for our shutdown date. And I was like, you guys, we're not going to shut down. You have to like plan for like a normal fuel cycle because we're going to keep running. We have to. And the reactor engineer, he told me, he was so sweet. He was like, oh, well, I'm going to make that one just for you. And I'm going to put it in the Heather folder. So we'll be ready.
That is so cool. And I bet your
Yeah,
optimism was just like infectious as well. Like there is really something to be said for like willing a reality into
yeah.
existence.
Yeah, so now we actually need that core design.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
it's totally great. And it's the Heather design.
Yeah, I want to get to that story, but I just want to wrap up the technical side just a little bit first. Are there other methods of control that you have for the core, such as like temperature shimming or anything like that, that you also have in your like tool set to control reactivity?
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's been 8 years since I was a reactor operator. I write procedures now. So, but yes, we have three main methods to control reactivity. And you already talked about the chemicals, the boric acid, boron takes neutrons out of the reaction. So there's a neutron population in the core that we maintain stable. It's the chain reaction of neutrons, and that's how we keep our constant power level. So you put boron in, that absorbs neutrons and makes power go down. Same thing with control rods, they absorb neutrons. So if you drive control rods into the core, they absorb neutrons and take away from that neutron population, and power starts going down. Another thing is with temperature, and we control that with steam flow. So we always say steam flow equals power level, essentially. So with our main turbine control system, if we ramp down the turbine, that slows the steam flow and also lowers power.
And how much like load following are you guys able to do, allowed to do, or is a utility interested in that? Or
we did a study on it, with all this talk of all the solar in California and how do we accommodate that, really high supply during the day when solar is available. And we did some studies, and we definitely could do more than we do right now. Right now, we're just 100% full power pretty continuously. And some other plants in the East, Byron and Illinois specifically, they have a different market system for their electricity, and they started doing a lot more load following just because of electricity prices. So they actually had a timer, like a little a laptop in their control room that told them, like prices are starting to go negative. So they would like ramp down the plant to put less power on the grid during those times. And they worked out a system that was pretty flexible and seemed to, support their utility in terms of pricing. So that was great. We could do that, and we just don't really need to. And
you have to ask
the
regulator if you want to like do a load follow maneuver or something, or like, are there certain like percentages that you're always allowed to do? And then
yes, there's the plant design is designed to handle a certain amount. We start getting into, I guess, more complex regulatory issues if you talk about operating at reduced power for significant periods of time. And so that's had a little bit of input into what happened at San Onofre and why they ended up shutting down instead of continuing to operate, at a reduced power level. So
yeah, can you tell us the song, the San Onofre, the song story, and then we'll lead that we'll go straight from there into Diablo like drama.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we need like 10 hours to do this podcast, Brett.
Let me check my calendar because I would spend 10 hours with you if I could.
Yeah, well, San Onofre, it's just a shame because it was a great plant too, and they definitely could have kept running it. They could have, actually replaced their steam generators again, and I think it would have been totally worth it. And there was some, from what I know, some backdoor dealings and political pressure that really drove the shutdown. So I mean, I've come to a little bit more of extreme opinions on when to keep operating nuclear since I've been doing this, and I pretty much think like all the time there's no reason to ever shut down nuclear. No matter what happens, we should fix it, and it's going to be worth it. And
yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so it's definitely a shame what happened at San Onofre.
And what was the issue that they cited, the steam generator issue? What was that issue?
They did a project that lots of other plants have done as well to replace their steam generators. And as part of that design process, the contractor who designed the steam generators didn't account for certain like flow induced vibrations in the steam generator tubes, which is like the most fragile part of this big heat exchanger, that basically keeps the primary system with reactor core and the pressurized coolant separate from the secondary system that makes steam for the turbine. So those, combine and transfer the heat from the reactor into the secondary system. So there was all this, turbulence in there, and these flow-induced vibrations started causing some cracking. But
then what were their options at that point? To replace the steam generator or not replace it and shut down the plant?
Replace them or operate at a lower power level where that flow turbulence is, a different frequency, doesn't,
why couldn't they have just
harmonics
shoved some sort of like, flow
for repair?
something. I don't know, just break up the flow a little bit.
Anything. Anything they could have done would have been better than shutting it down.
Yeah, but okay, so what you're saying is it wasn't really a technical issue at the end of the day. It was a political issue. So there are a multitude of technical solutions.
Yeah, and then it's interesting, how the outfall from that influenced what happened at Diablo Canyon.
Okay, so what happened at Diablo? When was the first sign that it wasn't going to go on forever?
Yeah, well, so when San Onofre shut down, it was quick and immediate. They had this issue, they shut down the plants and they didn't really start up again. So all of a sudden California is missing 8% of its electricity, and that came immediately from natural gas. So all of a sudden there's all this natural gas demand. At the same time, we had a gas storage field in Southern California that had this horrible leakage problem and leaked all this methane into the environment. And it was a huge environmental catastrophe. And so California politicians saw this and they're like, well, what if something happens with Diablo Canyon? We got to plan for it and be more prepared in case anything happens. And it was just like this leap of like, of course something's going to happen because it's another nuclear plant. And
wow. Okay. So this is the whole thing where the nuclear industry does not do its communication well, because when the gas industry causes an extreme catastrophe, they're somehow able to convince the politicians we need more gas and less alternate energy sources.
Yeah, it's been a mess, honestly. And yes, Kristen and I first started hearing rumors of, like, we're not going to relicense Diablo Canyon back in 2015. And
and when was the license like up for renewal? What year was that supposed to happen?
It's in 2025 is our NRC licenses. So everyone on site had always just assumed like we were already almost done with our relicensing process. Like I said, my company's been always like really on top of staying ahead of the game in terms of Diablo Canyon, in terms of plant upgrades, in terms of policy, in terms of anything regulatory. They're just like out there and getting it. And I was so proud of that. And so in 2015, we started hearing these rumors that we might not relicense. And that's when Kristen and I kind of met up and decided to start Mothers for Nuclear to try and communicate about nuclear differently. And
she also works at Diablo. She's another operator.
She does, yeah. Oh, she's an engineer. She's a civil engineer. So she's done, concrete inspections on the containment domes. There's a really great picture of her rappelling down the side of the containment structure, looking for cracks. And She also worked a lot on our seismic analysis, and right now she's an engineering manager for our design engineering group.
Okay, so you heard that they weren't going to go for license extension in 2025, and then you teamed up to say, hey, let's advocate for getting the license extended.
Yeah, basically because we realized that it wasn't a technical issue. Like Diablo Canyon is such an amazing plan and can obviously keep running for so much longer. We're like, why are we making this decision? And we realized that it was all political. And then we realized that the politics are just a result of public perception and, politicians trying to do what's popular. And so we're like, what can we do? Oh, like we're environmentalist, liberal moms, kind of hippies, like pretty different than most people in our industry. And we have a special story to tell about how we changed our minds, how we were so skeptical. And maybe we can connect with people who are also skeptical, who, mothers and women who don't have time to go work at a nuclear plant and ask a billion questions, before, figuring out what the true story is and that it's actually a great thing. And so we decided to try and start influencing public perception, like at the base level, and that would eventually trickle up to our politicians and our policy, and that would eventually, support continued operation of the plant. So I'd say yes, success.
Yeah. Well, I want to. There's still more to tell about the saga, all the ups and downs of it. But before we do that, can you maybe just reflect a little bit on what you two are unique in the sense that like you really got up and fought for what you believed in, even at a risk to your reputation, to just like your lifestyle, you got to put yourself out there.
On our families.
Yeah, exactly. Open yourselves up to public criticism. That's really rough. And then of course, like maybe even like in the back of your mind, you're like, oh my God, I could actually lose my job over this because like I'm going against the bosses.
Yeah.
So I understand it is difficult, yet you did it. But that being said, I am shocked at how few of you there are, given how many plants across this country have been shutting down. They each have, I don't know what, 600, 800 workers. Like, why aren't we seeing more of you across the country, like the workers, like fighting for the plants?
Oh gosh, that's the best question ever that I don't have an answer to, because I don't understand it totally either. But I will say that there's so much history in nuclear, and you asked me the history of Diablo Canyon. We didn't really get into it, but there's so much anti-nuclear influence, and I think our industry has responded historically by kind of like duck and cover, and like we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, like quietly under the radar. We're not going to attract attention. We're just going to keep making all this clean power and not try and like stir up any trouble. We're just going to it's been very they're very cautious and conservative in terms of their communications because they don't want attention, and they know that
but the reaction of a normal, like your average person to that is that they're hiding something. Like every other industry gets up and fights, like the cigarette. Like, I mean, like look at all these terrible industries that get what they want. Like the cigarette industry gets up and fights. Like the chemical industry, the fabric industry, like they all get up and fight. And then people are like,
so
oh, well, maybe
because those are actually damaging, and nuclear is actually the best. And so like it deserves to be fought for. And
I know this is so ironic.
Yeah, it's backwards. It's definitely like our whole strategy in the industry. I don't know if it was even really like a conscious strategy or more of like a survival, but
I don't think it was. I don't think it was. I think it was just like incentives that we can't fully understand or map out or process, like a confluence of incentives. Actually, I haven't seen any like individual evil actors in the nuclear industry. I'm one of the biggest critics of like how the nuclear industry conducts itself, given my exposure to it. But all the individual people I think are amazing. Like I'm constantly in awe and enamored. Like
well, and for a long time we didn't know that nuclear needed saving, like we were fine, and we didn't know
victim of its own success in many ways.
And defend it. And I remember thinking we have another local advocacy group here called the Californians for Green Nuclear Power. And they started, I think, in 2014 or 2012, like before us, way before us. And I was like, I'm so glad they're out there doing this, because like I don't want to do that. So I don't have to. And that's great. And I don't know if we really need them or not, but that's great, And Yeah, so I think a lot of employees just like we're still kind of gearing up to the idea that, yeah, our jobs and our industry and this technology is under threat because of public perception. And lots of people just don't really know what to do with that. And that's something that, is influenced by that history. But, I wouldn't say that there's not people like me out there. I think they're out there. We just we're still like gathering our troops and like, gearing up. And the growth that we've seen in our pro-nuclear advocacy community over the last 6 years has been amazing and so encouraging. And there's so many other groups now that are attacking this from like every angle, and I think every voice is important in this discussion. And no matter how extreme, if it's, I don't know if you've heard about the nuclear bros. There have been a few, journalists contacting us about doing articles on nuclear bros that are like really all nuclear all the time, and that's it, nothing else. And then
it's funny because I think that term is used like disparagingly, but I don't think it should be.
A little bit, yeah. No, some of the best nuclear bros are women, and we just, we'll own it. And
I love that you just said that, by the way, because oh man, that's so cool that you said that, because when I had heard that term before, I thought the attack was like some portion of society trying to use the gender wedge to like turn women in general against nuclear by calling the people who like nuclear bros.
of course,
that you just owned that totally flipped the whole thing.
Yeah, well, there's so much subtlety and stuff going on with how media portrays all of us and all the different voices in our movement. And as a mother for nuclear, I picture myself as being kind of like the peacekeeper and mediator between all of us, and helping everyone feel welcome in this movement, because we really do need just every voice, no matter how extreme, no matter how meek or mild or what you really care about. Nuclear is the right answer for so many reasons. And I think all those people, no matter how they talk about nuclear, they're going to reach their audience of people that agree with them. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Can you walk me through like the major chapters or milestones or turning points of the Diablo fight? I know we could probably spend hours going through all the details, but at least walk me through the basic timeline. So they announced in 2015, they announced where they weren't going to seek license re-extension. You get together and start advocating. What are the next key milestones along this saga?
Yeah, so 2015 was actually just rumors. We didn't know what was going to happen yet. So we're like trying to gear up to prevent our company from, like making an announcement that we can't go back on. We wanted to prevent, like a shutdown right now. We didn't know what was going to happen. And so we're like, we have to do something right now. So we geared up and we started Mothers for Nuclear on Earth Day in 2016. And then planned for the March for Environmental Hope, a big pro-nuclear march in Northern California. And right before that, our company made the official announcement that, we're going to shut down the plant at the end of our licenses and not relicense. So that like deflated our whole plans for this march that we were going to do. And, before that, we had a whole bunch of employees and other people who were on board. And then after that announcement came out, they're all like, well, the decision's made, there's nothing we can do now. And that's exactly what we were worried about. But we still had the march. We had a whole bunch of other people come in from other areas, other plant workers and people from around California that weren't in the nuclear industry, that just supported nuclear for its environmental benefits. And so we still had the march. We ended up at the State Lands Commission meeting in Sacramento in June of 2016. And it was kind of like our big first launch of like, here we are, we're Mothers for Nuclear, and we're advocating for this, for environmental reasons and health reasons. And then of course they still made the decision to go ahead and continue with the plans to shut down the plant and decommission in 2025. And
why does the state have anything to do with this? Maybe I'm a little confused about that. How is it not like a private matter?
Well, again, there was a lot of, kind of backdoor talkings about what to do with Diablo Canyon between, I think, our company and officials in the state and different regulatory agencies. And what basically happened is they found this way to kind of force PG&E, my company, to agree to not relicense because these other permits were going to expire. And so the state agency said, well, we're not going to extend your permits. unless you promise to not relicense. So it was like a
Yeah,
tit for
because
tat kind of
there's so many
pressure.
ways to skin a cat. When someone wants to do something, there's so many ways
Yeah.
to attack it from the side.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely think that we could have totally ignored that threat, and we could have, paid fees or whatever, like penalties
Yeah.
for not having this permit. And we could have just been like, we don't care, we're going to keep
Yep.
operating. But
Yep.
I think at the time, my company was in a fragile position and they kind of just wanted to get out of nuclear too. And so they went along with it. And
That's the other problem. The companies that own nuclear typically own other
hard for
stuff
them.
too. Yeah, and so it's not like the top management, which often you need for these monumental decisions,
Yes.
are incentivized to fight for nuclear.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So we're
okay.
trying to change that going forward and, try and set things up so this doesn't, have an opportunity to happen again.
Yeah.
But yeah, so our company was, headed hard down this path of decommissioning, preparing for decommissioning. We hired a whole organization of people to start planning and start, rearranging our finances. And
that's the other vicious thing. Like, part of the nuclear industry itself benefits from shutting down plants because it's a revenue stream towards decommissioning analysis and and accessing the decommissioning fund. It's like, and then the other problem with that is these people are treated as the nuclear industry in the same way that people who produce clean energy are treated part of the nuclear industry, but in the public sphere. So like, people might say, oh, well, here's a nuclear expert. Yeah, but that's a nuclear expert who is incentivized financially to shut down plants. Like,
I know, it's so messed up. Yeah.
okay. So then, yeah. So, all right. So you tried your first stab at convincing people, didn't work. Then what were some of the next shots?
Yeah. Well, so then it was just like, it seemed pretty bleak in California. And we're like, our company is just like full bore, not open to any kind of like, oh, well, if the state changed their mind, of course we would support them. Like, no, we're decommissioning. Like, there was no question. And
hello, Germany. Yeah.
we're kind of like, okay, yeah, what do we do with that? We didn't really know what to do. So Krista and I just focused on building up Mothers for Nuclear, expanding, our reach and our voice, trying to reach more people and grow the organization. And, we're both engineers. Neither one of us are communicators or like used to doing public outreach. We're not organizers. And so we're like, we have to learn all this stuff. We have to learn how to write. We have to learn how to do our own website. And so we're flailing around, just for a few years, just trying to grow our organization and develop a lot of our talking points, how we want to talk about nuclear differently. And it really started to shift in 2019 in California when it was.
By the way, can you just tell me the selection of Mothers for Nuclear, which I just think that branding is just so genius. Was there like a debate name, or like, how did you decide? You could have named your organization anything, but I think it was just so clever to do it that way. How did that come about?
Yeah, we talked about it, beat around the bush for a long time in terms of our name. Maybe we should be Mothers for Sustainability. Maybe we should be, Mothers for Clean Energy, because that's what we really care about are those things. And yeah, and we started originally organizing under the name Save Diablo when we had a lot of our, coworkers more on board, and we wanted to save the plant, and eventually kind of settled on more of a, how do we best reach the public in a way that's grabbing their attention and making people think about nuclear in a different way. And the mothers term, like, people hear that and they're like, wait, for nuclear? You're for, like, I've heard, mothers against this, mothers against that. There's all these things that mothers are against, but mothers for, and it's nuclear energy, like that. It's just so surprising that it grabs their attention. And when we decided to actually be for nuclear and not for clean energy or some other thing, we're like, we can't like hide this at all. It's got to be totally obvious what we're advocating for and why. And this is different. There's plenty of other groups of moms who are climate moms or, Mothers Out Front, clean air moms, all of those, which are great. And I'm like in all those groups also, but there's no other Mothers for Nuclear. And so this is a special thing that we have to do. And we just kind of decided, like, yes, this is what we have to do.
God, it's just so genius. It's just like so economical with the words.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were saying, you don't shy away from saying nuclear. I think that's a big mistake that people make. for like, okay, it's like there's no like confusion of, it's
Yeah.
like, because you could have called yourself nuclear moms and maybe people might have thought, okay, anti-nuclear stuff. Okay, so like you're clarifying this is
Yes.
unequivocally positive. And then
Yeah, and I love.
mothers, which is like not only humanizing, but it is also, not only is it humanizing, it's also surprising, and then it also plays upon something that is in society, since like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the fact that mothers can band together to do so, so like people are
Yeah,
familiar. So it's
we
just so
care about the
perfect.
future.
It's just so perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, take me through a couple more of the milestones. Let's get to the point. Like, what was your darkest day in your fight for
Oh gosh.
Indigenous?
There's so many. It's up and down all the time. I wouldn't say that there's not dark days even now, because we're like, well, we have this 5-year extension, but it needs to be 20 years, and what are we going to do about that? And
Okay, so what's up with that? So tell us the history. When was there like a
we're
shining
just all
light?
over the place.
No, it's okay. What was the shining light where you realized the politics might have swung around? And then like, yeah, what led up to it and then what happened?
Yeah, well, so in 2019, I'm starting to get this feeling that California energy is a bit of a mess. I'm learning more and more about it, and I'm just like, this is a disaster. And now it's getting to the point where it's been, 3 years since the announcement. We've made very little progress on clean energy. We're still 50% natural gas. We still have all these imports. And then 2020 came, and it's like, oh, there's going to be blackouts. And our previous governor, Gray Davis, was ousted from office because of blackouts. And so here's Gavin Newsom. He's the one that kind of initiated this deal about the permits expiring and the State Lands Commission holding that over the company's head. And he was the lieutenant governor at the time and the head of the State Lands Commission. So it was kind of him using it as a political chip, like, I'm going to shut down this nuclear plant and I'm going to gain all this popularity from it. So all of a sudden, I'm like, well, it's going to look pretty bad for him if California is having blackouts, like this has not gone well for other governors. And so we started pushing more and more. We geared up a whole bunch of our, connections that we'd made over the last 3 years, and all these other pro-nuclear groups that had been, just forming and coming out of the woodwork, Stand Up for Nuclear, with Paris Ortiz Wines, and Eric Meyer runs Generation Atomic, and like all of them have been, like around for a while, but we're all like, we can gear up and we can do something about this. So let's team up. And we started having our weekly Save Diablo Canyon meetings again. I'm kind of pushing these other groups because I'm a full-time working mom, and I'm like, you guys, this is your job. You need to let's start doing this now. Like, now is the time. Now is when it's obvious that we need Diablo Canyon, and we need to start really pushing this messaging. And then as Isabel Bomaki came on the scene, and she wants to help save Diablo. And so we're just like, we're feeling this huge confluence of, it's the right time to really make the case. And she helped us plan the rally to save clean energy. She did most of it actually herself. We're just like consultants. And I think that was hugely impactful. And then, like more and more groups are just getting on board and helping support the case that, yes, we need Diablo Canyon. And, it was a great report that came out from MIT and Stanford. And, those kind of academic reports are really important in terms of influencing public policy and people that are making decisions. And so like a whole bunch of stuff started happening. And then I think it was April of this year, that Gavin put out a statement to a newspaper, like, I think we need to change course on Diablo Canyon. And we're just like, oh my gosh.
Who changed his mind? Do we know how he was influenced? Because like, if he was one of the main things holding it back, how did we flip him?
I think it's a combination of things. And I don't know if you can ever really tell, with politicians, how many forces they have influencing them. But
okay, so we didn't like get a hold of like one of his like trusted advisors and like sit him down at a coffee table and say, you got to listen to us, like, or did something like that happen?
A few, yeah. Okay. Every angle, yes.
Yeah.
And
but actually the reason I'm asking is because like, okay, just like we have to share best practices across operating a nuclear plant, we have to share best practices across saving a nuclear plant. So I'm like curious to know, like, let's just say, okay, you don't know the answer, but from your perspective, your gut feeling, like what tactics really work?
Silence.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
I don't know. It's just, I'd like to hope that everything we've done with Mothers for Nuclear, we've demonstrated public support in a different way. And I think that makes it safer for politicians to make this move.
Oh,
because
100%
us out there.
100%. Like unless a politician sees citizenry supporting something, even if it's only one or two, they need some indication. Otherwise, like, they cannot be influenced just by money or economics. Or they're like, there's a if you don't become a politician without getting the pulse of the people a little bit. And you and everyone else who is involved okay, so it's like, you know how sometimes you hear like these few loud negative voices and it scares a lot of people. Like a few loud positive voices is also like representative of a broader movement. And I think politicians realize that and need that in order to like make hard decisions. They need to at least be able to have heard like there are mothers out there that are campaigning for this. Like at least
I
once.
think that's the answer, Brett, honestly. And it's been, like historically, there's been this huge amount of anti-nuclear voices in California. They're large and powerful and environmental groups, like they're all very forceful and powerful. And the media would always go to them whenever, any kind of news came out. So they'd have this very unbalanced perspective on nuclear. But now there's a group like us, and they can come to Mothers, they can come to other pro-nuclear groups, and there's this whole other side building up balance in the conversation. So yeah, I hope that we've made it safer for them to make this move. I think that had a lot to do with it. But yeah, behind the scenes, lots of our members and partners were also reaching out to Gavin's funders and Gavin's, like, anyone that we could think of, like we're messaging lieutenant governors, we're messaging his wife, and just like, maybe not
that's what I want to hear.
I
want to hear the tactics.
No, we never hear back from them, but we're just like, we're going to keep throwing this out there so that they know that there's another side to this issue.
So cool. You absolutely have to do that. I feel like people get discouraged when they don't hear back, but like it takes someone like that's like truly brave to just keep pushing. And I get it. Like for all those out there listening, just for all those out there who like give up after they don't hear back, like these things stick in people's like they probably open the email even if they didn't want to write back, and then like, I don't know, 6 months later at a dinner party, somebody brings up, oh, what about nuclear? And all of a sudden Gavin's wife is like, oh, I think we should have it. And like, and then
exactly.
He hears that. Yeah, it's like, that's so
every
cool.
angle.
So cool. All right. And then, so what was the official announcement? Like, when was the like winning moment?
Gosh, that's why I said, like, we still don't have necessarily a winning moment. Our company is still like, oh, we're doing both paths. We're doing decommissioning and relicensing. It's totally ridiculous.
So break that
but
out.
Also necessary, maybe.
What's that? So, okay. Why, where is it written down that it's 5 years? What's that about?
And
5 years from when to when?
Yeah. Okay, where to start? Yeah, so over the last couple years, like, I've been trying to get more media attention for this potential, this possibility, trying to get people to talk about, we need this. And a lot of reporters are like, well, how would that even happen? Like, it's illegal, or it's impossible, or like, it's so far, like, tell me all the ways that you think it could happen. I'm like, well, I don't know. Gavin would just have to decide to change his mind. And we don't really know how it would happen, but we can do hard things, and we just like have to kind of have faith that, like, yeah, we can figure out a way to turn this around. It can't be that hard. And
we can split an atom. We can certainly sign a permit. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, so it appears that Gavin's changed his mind, at least on a temporary extension, and it went to our state legislature in the form of a whole bunch of legislation to help the company be able to actually accomplish this relicensing and continued operation, and getting all the different bodies on board that have to extend permits or like approve continued operation. And so it's basically a whole bunch of state agencies kind of gearing up and figuring out, okay, how do we turn this boat around? And there's a lot of people working to make that happen right now, including people in PG&E and the company. It's really great. And
but maybe let me ask a little bit more specifically, this 5-year thing, that's a 5-year extension on like the permit that was going to be used as a tool to shut it down, essentially?
No, so that permit was a lands use permit that was actually going to expire in 2018. And so that's why the 2016 timeframe was a little bit more urgent. They're like, oh, this permit's going to expire in 2018, and the state's going to force us to shut down then, unless we make this agreement with them that we're not going to relicense in 2025.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a little complexity there. And it's funny because that permit that was going to expire in 2018, there's, you know, a whole bunch of permits that we need to run the plant, and those are generally designed to cover the life of the plant, which was originally, you know, 40 years. It aligns with our Nuclear Regulatory Commission operating license. And at the beginning of you know, planned operation of Diablo Canyon, there were some delays due to construction and, you know, drawings getting mixed up and various other things, you know, like seismic issues. And like, it took longer to start actually running the plant than they had planned. And this one permit, they forgot to shift it to match the new operating cycle. So that's why it was going to expire earlier. Yeah, so it's just like, it's this technicality, you know, and it's just like they were able to politically leverage that. And it's very...
Okay, so then, sorry, but let's just come back to the 5-year thing. Like, what is like, yeah, what is the status right now of when the intended operation goes till what date exactly?
Yeah, well, so
under scenario A, I know there's still scenario B.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, I had heard that we were going to try and pursue 10 years, which is a little more reasonable than 5 years. 5 years is pretty short and pretty quick. Like, if we're going to go through all this effort to turn this around, you know, 5 years is like a smaller return for all that effort. So I had heard 10 years. And then I think some stuff happened with our state legislature and certain senators that really, you know, were feeling like to do, I don't know, due diligence for their constituents. They had to push back really hard and like limit it even more from 10 years to 5 years. So I feel like there's a few key players in the state legislature that shortened that from 10 years to 5 years. And that's pretty disappointing.
Is this 5 years after the NRC relicensing, or is this 5 years?
Yeah, so what we have to do before 2025 is we have to restart that NRC relicensing process, and we have to get all those other permits in line to support operation from 2025 to 2030.
Okay, so that's the next
5-year period. Yeah. The NRC operating license is for 20 years. That's how they do it. So we'll get that license and it'll be for 20 years, but the state legislation is going to say, you know, like, we're only going to run the plant for 5 more years.
But is it possible that even if the state approves this extra 5 years, the company makes like an economical decision that it's too expensive to go through the NRC relicensing process via whatever and just not apply?
Yeah, I think that's always possible. Yeah, the company is concerned with their finances, and they're, you know, in a mess because of wildfires and just coming out of bankruptcy, and our CEO announcing all these plans to underground all these wires. And it's just like, it's a scramble in the whole company. And that's all of that's outside of Diablo Canyon. So now here's this other complication that they were just like, we're not looking at Diablo. Like, we're not, we don't have to worry about it. We're just going to like deal with all this other stuff. And then all of a sudden here comes the Diablo issue again. And I'm sure they have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I don't want to speak for them at all, but it's just, it's going to be a lot of work for them. And I think it has been made clear, you know, from various angles that the federal government and the state government really support continued operation of the plant. And so as long as they keep getting those signals, I think they'll continue down this path, which I think is the right path, you know. And
yeah,
we were awarded a grant from the federal government to help with some of the financing and from the state, you know, so like everyone's working together to make this happen.
And then when it comes to the NRC licensing, because I have to say, it really scared me when the already issued license for Turkey Point was rescinded.
Yes.
What were there any like dates missed or something that are going to make it very difficult or create like another political tool within the NRC to like not grant the license? Like, what's going on with like the logistics of NRC relicensing?
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be any holdups in the NRC. I don't think that's going to be a barrier. You know, like I mentioned before, we were almost already done with the relicensing process, like back in 2014. We were so close, and, you know, our previous plant management that, you know, kind of has been advising us and helping us along this path. they've told me, like, oh, we only needed, $30 million more or 300. It's not very much to finish the whole relicensing process. Like, we were that close. We were 99% done. So, there's various timelines that the NRC recommends in terms of going for relicensing, and I think we're kind of close to some of those timelines, but there's always a process for doing exceptions, and I think they recognize the challenges to the situation. So yeah, I don't foresee any challenges there. I think it's more at the state level in terms of getting people on board.
And do you have any and I've got an idea that I want to share with you as well, but do you have any idea what did happen with Turkey Point, and what the story is there? Because I still haven't
I don't totally know, other than that's a second relicensing process. So that's the first relicensing, would extend a plant operation from 40 years, 20 more years to 60 years. And so Turkey Point is going for a second relicensing, which would go from 60 years to 80 years. And there were some, I guess, questions brought up. I don't know if it was as a result of, public pushback in terms of the environmental reviews for that second relicensing period and how detailed those have to be.
Yeah, it's like, I don't even know why it's even a question. Like, I don't understand why these buildings aren't forever buildings. I mean, for God's sakes, like the Empire State Building's been up there for 100 years. It was built in like 1920 or something. So if 1920, you can, like, buildings can hang around, much bigger buildings, and they have even more people.
Much less robust. Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, for sure.
like, so why isn't a nuclear plant a forever plant and you just replace things every now and then? Like, what is this all like? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And they're built in a very robust fashion. And I just think that it's all the nuclear thing. Like, we have to do everything above and beyond, and we have to have, maintenance that's pretty crazy. And I just want to say sometimes, like, whatever, if something breaks, we'll fix it. Like, it's not a big deal. Exactly like your sentiment. And I really agree with that. I just think there's a lot of, public perception issues and a lot of regulatory history. And it just kind of all feeds into this way overdoing what we actually need to do to make the plant safe.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my idea, and you tell me if this has been floated before.
Okay.
Response to it. But like, why don't we just declare the plot of land that it sits on like a federal parkland or something, to take it out of the state's jurisdiction and just move it to the federal jurisdiction?
Yeah.
And I think like the state would probably want that too, because like it does provide 8%, it does provide like 8% of the power, right? And so I think the politicians who are even poo-pooing it really do want it there for their people. They just want to also say that. And so this would give them an out. They could be like, well, we fought to shut it down, but like secretly like, oh, thank God we're not having blackouts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a great idea. And I love that you're floating this idea. And yeah, we've gone around, like so many crazy ideas that we're like, how could we actually do this? And one of the most recent examples of that was with Ryan Pickering and Scott Lathrop. And Scott is the president of our local YTT Chumash tribe, and they're the previous residents of the land around Diablo Canyon. And we were thinking that, that would be so great if we give the land back to the Chumash and have them run the plant. And then it's like outside of the state. It's totally, like in the
that's such a creative idea.
Yeah. And we're like, we'll rename the plant, the Chanu power plant. And
that is cool.
Yeah, so there's lots of ideas floating around about how to actually make this a reality and how to have it be the best outcome for all the groups involved. And I think it's really important to keep talking to all the groups. And
what about like forcing a divestiture from PG&E to just some like upstart utility or something?
Yeah, we tried to get people to buy it, and like we try to start, nuclear power purchase agreements, and that's pretty complicated in California. There's a company in Sweden that does it. It's pretty cool. It's just like, you want to buy nuclear electricity, come to us, and I think that's great. And like something like that could really demonstrate the value of Diablo Canyon to the state more. And so I'm glad that we had so many different people pushing this issue, this challenge from so many different angles that, I don't know how much confidence I had, but like there's got to be a way to do it to make this a better situation. And there's a lot of great ideas out there.
Okay, cool. So what's next? Or like, we're running a little low on time, but I'd love for you to have like, be able to, share any other stories or take this conversation in any other directions before.
Yeah, well, next, we have to definitely get from 5 years to 20 years on continued operation. And we feel like our whole group of nuclear advocates feels like it's a really great time to push for nuclear generally in California, not just Diablo Canyon. So we were like, oh, well, next, we have to get to the 20 years and we have to also repeal our nuclear moratorium. How are we going to do that? And then just last week, we heard an announcement that a group of legislators introduced this package that includes repealing our nuclear moratorium. They just struck out all the language. You can go look at it. It's all like red and lined out. And it's just
wait, so where's the nuclear moratorium? California has one?
Yes. Yeah. Lots of states do.
Okay. I didn't realize California. Okay.
Yeah. So we need to build new nuclear in our state. And that's the first step in terms of letting other companies come in and develop plans to build more nuclear here. So I think that's super exciting. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did this just happen? It's another one of those things that people have been telling me, oh, it's so hard, you're never going to get it because of this and this and all these barriers. And yeah, so that's great news. And I guess a really cool story about the 5 years and 20 years. I was leaving work. It was a number of weeks ago, but I was just talking to a coworker about, like, oh, well, we got 5 more years. And I was like, we're going to do 20 more years. Yeah. And nuclear power plants have a lot of concrete. And so when I said this, like, I get pretty excited and I start raising my voice. And so I'm like, 20 more years. And it's like, 20 more years, 20 more years. Like, it's echoing off all this concrete in the power plant. And I was like, wow, that was great. But then I heard a whole bunch of other people, like other employees in this area of the plant, 20 more years, 20 more years. Like other people started yelling it back too. And it was really great and encouraging. And just, yeah.
I got the goosebumps just hearing that. That's awesome. Yeah. It's almost like the building is shouting it also, like reverberating.
Yes. The power plant is like, yeah, we can do this.
That is so
cool. It's really special.
Well, I don't think we can end on a better note than that. I literally do have the tingles. Heather Hoff, thank you so much for joining me. Honestly, I just have such like respect and reverence for you and the other groups that were involved and everything that you've done to fight. Like, it is hard, like, to go against your boss, to go against people, to like put yourself out there, like risk your reputation. Like, it is so hard. And the fact that you're willing to stand up and do it, I just think like you are going to go down in the history books, like when they tell the story of nuclear. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.